Hey everyone, my name is Zach. I'm a collaborator here at Forward Thinking Designs, and today we're going to be talking about our show control plugin for the Q-SYS platform called Ottomater. Ottomater allows you to queue any control within your design, including third-party plugins, all without the need to write a single line of code. You can fire any number of queues in sequence using the Go button, or sync a queue using external timecode, time of day, or even dedicated out-of-sequence triggers. This video will be broken up into two parts. In part 1, we will be going over Ottomater's properties, settings, and basic use. Part 2, we'll be building a simple show from scratch using Ottomater. That being said, let's get started. If you downloaded the Ottomater plugin from forwardthinkingdesigns.com and you have Q-SYS Designer already installed, double-click the .qplugx file to install. A dialog box will pop up and click Yes. Now Ottomater will appear in your Designer Plugins directory under User, Forward Thinking Designs. We are going to drag Ottomater into our design. If you purchased a license key, copy and paste that key into the license key property of the plugin. Without a license key, Ottomater will operate in a demo mode that fully allows building and testing your show, but operation will be limited to 10 minutes before needing you to restart your design. Let's pause here for a quick second and talk about how Ottomater controls your design and some different terminology that we use throughout the plugin. In Ottomater, a command is any single action. This could be turning a button true, changing a fader to 0 dB, or even firing off another cue. A cue is a sequence of commands. A trigger is anything that starts a cue. This can be the Go button, or any of our available time options. Ottomater works by controlling named components in your design. Here I have two mixers, one of which I've named Awesome Mixer. Now when I run Ottomater, because I've named Awesome Mixer will be available to Ottomater for control. However, the mixer that I did not name will not be available. So make sure anything that you want to control in Ottomater, you have given a unique name in your design. Heading back to properties, the prefix property allows you to limit what named components show up in Ottomater. That way, if you have a design that has hundreds of named components, you could say only the ones that start with the word auto are going to show up in Ottomater. Timecode lets you select a time source that you'd like to use for triggering cues. Direct queues is how many direct queue triggers that you'd like to have. Log queues is whether or not you'd like to write to the log anytime a queue is triggered. Log commands is the same thing, but for every single individual command. Log length is how many log entries you'd like to keep. Selected color and deselected color let you customize the look of Ottomater's list boxes. Alright, now that we've set up Ottomater's properties, I've gone ahead and added a couple named components so that we'll have something to play with once we get Ottomater running. And we're going to go and start our design now. And let's open up Ottomater. Alright, now that we have Ottomater open, let's go over how to use it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a queue. So down here, you can see the plus button next to the queue list box, and we're going to add a queue. And you'll see that a new queue has appeared here. Now, you can edit the queue number down here in the bottom left corner. So I could say I want this to be Q2. And you can change the name also right next to it. So I can call this Awesome Q. If we want this queue to be triggered by timecode, all we have to do is simply change the timecode number here to anything other than 0. As soon as we change it to anything other than 0, Ottomater will now treat this as a timecode enabled queue. So I can say I want this to be at 2 seconds in, and now you'll also see the timecode will appear in the list box next to the name and the queue number. Now I can add another queue. I can call this another Awesome Q. And I could give it a time of, say, 5 seconds. But I can also change the queue number to to 1. So in this scenario, this queue will be triggered via timecode after this queue. But in my queue list, it will appear before this queue because its queue number is less. So if you're running through it manually, this one will be first and this one will be second, whereas timecode will treat it the other way around. Now clicking go will simply play whatever queue is currently selected. So I can say, click this one and say go, and then you'll see the next one has now been selected. And I'll click go and it'll play that one. I can also recall a queue if I'm using an external control script. I can just simply type in the number of the queue here, click enter, and now it will recall that queue, and I can even click take there to take it. Now this is great, but obviously we're not controlling anything yet because these queues are empty. In the box next to it, this is where all the commands for that queue will live. So we're going to insert a command. Now here we can select either what component or what internal Ottomater function that we want to call with this command. So I've added a player and an audio mixer. So I could simply say player, and then it will list all the controls that are associated with that player. And I can say play. I could select what type it is. It's already a trigger. But if there was other values you wanted to set, I could say I want a Boolean, on or off. I can tell it I want to be a value. And you can type in what value you want it to be and what you would like the crossfade time to be. So I could say if this was a fader, I could say I want to duck down to -100, but I want to do that over 5 seconds. I can also choose position, which is a value between 0 and 1. And I have the same crossfade function for that. Or text, which will change the string value of the control. So it's great for text boxes, combo boxes, list boxes, all that kind of stuff. Now Ottomater has some internal functions of its own. So under timecode, you can enable or disable the timecode. Stop all commands will stop all commands that Ottomater is running except for the ones that are in this queue. So if I have Q2 running and I use stop all commands in Q1, that will stop any commands that are still running in awesome queue, but then proceed to run any commands that are after this. So I could say I want stop all commands, but then after I stop all the commands, I want the audio player to play. There's go to queue, which simply moves the currently selected queue to that queue. So I can say I want to go to awesome queue, and it will go to that one. To make it a better example, I'm just going to add a third queue. And I'm going to tell this I want to go to Q3. So now when I run this queue, you'll see it'll skip over and go to Q3. I can also run a queue, which will actually play all the commands associated with that queue. So it doesn't move the playlist to where that queue is. It just runs all the commands associated with it. The other thing you can do when editing commands is that commands will always fire in the specified order that they are in this command list. So if you have multiple commands that are all at the same time, but you want to do them in a different order, you can simply click on the command you want to move, and then use these move up and move down buttons to move that command up and down in the list. However, I'm going to add another command here, change that to say 1 second in, and just give it something arbitrary. I'll just make it play. So this is at 0 seconds and this is at 1 second. If I try to move this down, it won't let me because this time is after this time.
but it will let me move it up because these times are at the same time. So you can only move commands up and down through other commands that happen at the same time. If you want to delete a command, just click the command that you want and delete it. You can also name commands on the bottom bar here, typing in any kind of name. So I could say fire Q3 with 1,000,000 exclamation marks. And now you'll see the name has popped up here. You already saw it. You can change the time. And this command list, the times here are in hundredths of a second, not frames. However, for time code triggers, this value is set via what kind of time input you have. If you're using a second input, then it's hundredths of a second. If you're using time code input, it would be frames. And if you're using clock, you're limited to straight seconds with no decimal point. To enable and disable time code, you can just click enable and disable. If you're somewhere in the playlist and you want to jump to the beginning, you can click top of show and this will jump automatically to the top of the playlist. Once you have your show set up, and if you don't want anyone to accidentally edit anything, you can simply click the lock button here and that'll lock out all the editing controls. So it allows you to still move around, but you can't accidentally click anything that would change something. Now, when you're running a command, there's two text boxes here. This one shows time elapsed for the last command that you took and the time remaining of the last command that you took. If you have one queue that takes a while to run, but one that doesn't take very long, just note that these time elapsed and time remaining will show the time elapsed and time remaining for the last queue that you took, not necessarily that there's anything running in the background. If you take a queue, you can pause it at any time and resume it. But also know, if you take a queue and pause it, taking any other queue or even taking the same queue again will resume execution. If we move on to the next tab under Direct Queues, under this Direct Queues tab, it allows you to fire a queue without needing to be selected. So you can fire that queue in any order, in any time, without needing to physically go there. So I could say I want this button to fire Q2, and it will just populate the name. And when I trigger it, you'll see that the last one it fired was Q2. I could say I want Q1, and it will reflect that the last one that was fired was Q1. Under the configuration tab, you have your show file, which you can simply just copy and paste. So you can copy it to save a copy, or you could copy and paste it into another copy of Ottomater. The log here is the log. So as you can see, it showed what we've been doing for the past couple minutes. Q triggered. So it will tell you what triggered it. So Q triggered by queue number 1. So this was when a queue was being triggered by another queue. This is being triggered by a direct button and go button. And there's even entries for time code. Down here in the corner is your queue list limit. This is great if you want to put your queue list onto a UCI. So previous queues is how many queues before the current selected queue that you want to show. And next queues is how many queues after the current queue you want to show. So real quick, you can come over here, and I'm just going to add and insert a bunch of queues. Now you can use these arrows to navigate up and down the queue list. But to enable that queue list limit, you just click this button right here that says Enable Queue Limit. So now you'll see, because I had 3 before, there's 3 before, And I had 10 after, so here's my 10 after. And as I move up and down the cue list, it will limit that rendering to the cues that are surrounding it all the way down to the bottom. So this works great if you're in a show, because as you take the go button, the cue list will move with you without having to scroll your list box. That concludes it for this video. Stay tuned for part 2, where you can follow along as we program a show from scratch.